Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to everybody to the West of England Combined Authorities webinar to give residents across the West of England an opportunity to listen to the panel here and to ask any questions of us. And I'm delighted that I've been joined by Richard from Avon and Somerset Police, both Lucy and Eric from Voy, my good colleague Jason here from our transport team. So a very warm welcome to all of you. And as I say, this was really an opportunity for residents to pose questions around our trials. And these trials are a really innovative and exciting new way for us across the region to trial a new form of low carbon travel that's going to give people an opportunity to be able to connect across our region far more effectively. And as a trial, this will run for 12 months and will help us all understand both the opportunities and challenges of this new form of transport. What we're going to call a hop-on, hop-off scooter arrangement will be available in Bristol and Bath to help residents, visitors get around central areas, access our university campuses, places of learning, access jobs, being able to then use this as a new exciting form of being able to move around the region. We will also be introducing a longer term e-scooter rental scheme, which will allow residents to take their e-scooters home, store them at their workplace, for instance, or to lock to cycle stands, as indeed you would with a bike. And we hope this gives confidence that people can get to and from work and other destinations during times when buses and train capacity is limited. There's one or two points I'd like to make before I hand over to my colleagues. And firstly, that we are running these pilots so that the rules can be made simpler in the long run. And this was a vital aspect of the work we've been doing with the Department for Transport, with our police, with our groups that we've engaged with. And we've engaged with lots of people across the region really constructively. So really important now about how we start launching this in a responsible way. And it's really important, given what we've heard from people, that we emphasize again that only e-scooters that are hired or leased through this trial can be used legally on public land. That's on roads and cycle paths. And I'm sure Richard will tell us a little bit more about that. But I must emphasize to everybody that those personal e-scooters that are outside this trial that people may have seen around and about to date are and remain illegal unless they are being used on private land with the permission of the landowner. So our e-scooters, say, cannot be ridden on pavements. Instead, our scooters can be ridden on any public land where cycles are permitted, i.e. on roads and cycle lanes. And whilst helmets are not mandatory, I certainly recommend them, and I know Voy and everybody else actively encourage that. Really important, I think, as well, just to make the point that our e-scooters are capped to a maximum speed of 15.5 miles an hour. And a phrase you'll learn a little bit more about, geofencing and GPS, allow the creation of no-go zones and speed restrictions to ensure people are parking in defined areas. So we've done lots of learning from other trials. And all riders must have either a full or provisional driving license. Any irresponsible use, dangerous riding, drunk riding, could result in penalty points on your license. It's vital that people understand that this is part of a responsible trial. And that's why we're working so closely with Avon and Somerset Police and with Voy, the providers, to enforce these rules and ensure everybody's safety is paramount. And my colleagues will touch on that a little bit more. I said earlier, we've had some really positive and constructive engagement, and we wanted to take learning from those previous trials, and we've done just that. And we've spoken to people across the region, and lots of people have engaged with us. That was us being proactive in engaging with residents and with equality groups, with our councils and other key stakeholders in advance of launching that trial. And I can tell you that they have been very, very constructive and positive comments. So we are meeting regularly with organisations representing those with visual impairments and blindness. And I just cite one or two of them now: the RNIB, the Bristol Sight Loss Council, the Thomas Pocklington Trust, and Bristol physical access chain. Again, emphasize that we've been very proactive in inviting these and others. I might add that not everybody chose to engage with us, but everybody who has been very positive about that engagement. So we will continue to meet with groups and we will continue to assess their feedback, because this is a trial. And that's why we've taken so much time to work closely with Voi, the operators, our councils and groups, to create go slow and no ride areas, particularly in busy parts of the cities. The trial area will start off on a small basis with a view to increasing in size if it's demonstrated to be operating safely. And I have to commend Voi, who've incentivized people to park scooters correctly to prevent people from abandoning them. And local ambassadors will educate users on riding and parking safely. So the whole point of the trial is to understand and learn how we can introduce e-scooters safely and effectively across the region and make them work for the whole community. It's also important to know that that feedback is also going to the Department for Transport, who are really keen to understand and learn from how we've been taking this forward. So really important for us as the West of England. This is part of our wider plans to get the West of England moving by giving sustainable alternatives to using the car. And very, very pleased that the West of England is one of only 4 future transport zones in the country. And we're trialing new transport technologies to cut congestion, improve air quality, reduce carbon emissions, and this is a key part of that. So really, really keen to meet more people now, really keen to see our new trial working successfully in collaboration with everybody here and engaging more people in that. So what I'd like to do now is ask Lucy from Voi if she'd like to share with us some more information about how to use the app, how to rent the scooters, some operational information, and just explain a little bit more about geofencing. Lucy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor Bowles, for the introduction. I'm now going to screen share. So I hope you can all now see my screen. Just see if I can make this slightly larger. So a quick overview of Voi. We are a Swedish company founded in 2018. We operate micromobility services, primarily the e-scooter. We do also offer e-bikes and e-mopeds, but primarily e-scooter in around 50 cities at the moment in 11 different countries, the UK being our 11th market now. We have about 5 million regular, active, returning riders, returning customers. We have in excess of 20 partnerships with different public transport authorities and public transport operators in different parts of Europe. We have around 500 employees in the company now. We're also growing the UK arm of the business very significantly, as you might imagine. And in the 2 years we've been operating, just over 2 years we've been operating, we have completed over 25 million safe rides. In January this year, we became carbon neutral for all of our city-based operations. West of England is included within that. Our logistics in cities are based on a fleet of electric vehicles and electric e-cargo bikes, which we use for our operations within the city. They're all powered by renewable electricity. Electricity from renewable sources, I should say. So that's an overview of Voi. I just want to very quickly talk about, so Mayor Bowles has already touched on the Department for Transport's requirements or the basis for these trials, but I just quickly wanted to talk about a few key points here. The first of those is to say that we have 3 different vehicles that we use for our operations. Now in the West of England, we will be using just 2 of those models, one for the on-street rental model and one for the long-term lease. All of our models have been issued vehicle special orders by the Department for Transport. They've also been type approved under German regulations, and similarly, just as for automotive, German vehicle regulations, type approval regulations for micromobility are some of the most stringent globally. So our vehicles do also meet those regulations. In terms of operational compliance, those of you who are familiar will know that the DFT has set out lots of different rules. Mayor Bowles has talked about one of the main ones there, which is that scooters are not permitted on the pavement. They must stick to roads and designated cycle lanes. And there are various other operational requirements. So we have obviously mapped our service against those requirements, and we have different measures in place to ensure that the service meets those requirements, and where those requirements are some sort of function of rider behaviour, that our riders are aware of the obligations placed on them, and that they have the appropriate education. One of the requirements for the DFT's trials is that all riders must have a driving licence. Now, if it's a UK licence, it can be a provisional or a full licence. If it's from another, if it's issued by another country, then it must be a full licence. We use a third-party service called Onfido to scan people's licences and just ensure that they do have the appropriate documentation before they can take their first ride. And then finally, the DFT has placed some requirements relating to insurance. Again, I think Mayor Bowles talked about only the trials being only the DFT approved trials being legal in the UK. I think it's also important to point out that it's only the trials themselves, the riders and the vehicles on the trials, that are covered by insurance as well. So moving on to the next slide. So this is just an overview of how we would typically launch in a new city or region. So for WECA now, we are, I guess, just before phase 2 on this overview. So we have spent, as Mayor Bowles mentioned, several weeks now talking to local stakeholders, including the combined authority and also the local councils, business representatives, stakeholders from representing different equalities groups, and the local police, which Richard will talk about after me, just to set in train what the trials will look like and what the initial launch will look like. So that's phase 1 on our sort of phased approach. Later this week, we will then launch the service in a small area of Bristol and a small area of Bath initially. The North Fringe area will follow at a later date. And then we will gradually, and in collaboration with the combined authority and the local councils and the police and other stakeholders, we will then gradually scale up those services. So this is an overview of what that will look like. Obviously, the timeframes for these things will depend on our observations actually on the ground and our discussions with those groups. So a little bit about what the initial launches will look like. Now, for the first month of our launches, and potentially for longer, and this is really something that we would base on observations and feedback and the data that our ambassadors on the ground collect, we will limit the speed of the top speed of the scooters during the first month of launch to 10 miles per hour. That is a top speed, so it's not a target, it's a limit. We can also create, and we have done for both Bristol and Bath, slower speed zones. So these are zones where the top speed of the scooter is limited to a lower speed of 5 miles per hour. And we've created those in areas that we've identified when we've done our site surveys and also speaking to city stakeholders. The initial fleet sizes at launch will be small. So they will be 50 scooters in Bath and 100 scooters in Bristol. We can dial this down further if we think it's judicious to do so, but these are the sizes that we will begin operating with. So they are significantly smaller than the potential size of the fleet at scale. As the slide says, we will grow over time, so start small and grow over time. The operating zones, the initial operating areas, are shown clearly in the app. That there is a map within the app. If a scooter is taken outside of those areas, then the power to the motor will be reduced, effectively making the speed of the scooter 0 miles per hour. So it becomes effectively, pretty much very difficult to ride in the way that's intended. It can only be, I guess, manually wheeled along, and that's quite difficult to do. Every scooter has a unique number plate, or I guess a unique identification plate, perhaps I should say. They're not registered at the DVLA, but they each have a unique identification plate installed on them. On the reverse, we do actually have a project underway at the moment, which should be complete hopefully within the next month, which is actually going to add additional side plates to the frame of the scooter. These will be reflective side plates. This is just to make the unique identification number even more visible. Geofencing has been referenced. So this is a practice of using the map of the operating area and being able to create boundaries within that map and to define different rules for the zones that those boundaries delineate. So geofencing is the main process that we use to create and then enforce through the technology, for instance, the slow speed zones, and then also the out of zone speed, so the no mile per hour zone when somebody leaves the operating zone. In every city we're operating in, we have a range of local campaigns that we do on the ground in the city, designed to just promote safe riding and rider education. So our ambassadors lead some of these events. They, for instance, will do things like give helmets away, and also give people information about our online traffic school, which is, you can find that at ridelikevoiler.com. The online traffic school is based on the highway code. It's a series of questions that cover the rules of the road in the UK. We've specifically adapted them for people who will be riding our scooters. So we've picked the sort of most pertinent topics, most pertinent questions. The school is accredited by DriveTech from the AA, and riders will receive an incentive for completing that school. So they'll receive some ride credits. There is also a referral program. So if users refer their friends who then complete the school successfully, they will receive some extra credit. So we do strongly encourage people to complete that. Just make sure they are familiar with the rules of the road and perhaps just brush up their knowledge in that space. If it's a little while since they maybe did their driving theory test and studied the highway code. We have two different types of VOI employees who support with just keeping the streets tidy and assisting riders with rider education and any other matters. The first of those is our ambassadors, which I've mentioned, who patrol the operating area, the streets that the service is active during daytime hours. And then at night time, we move to more specialist search and more specialist rangers who patrol the area with some slightly more specific tasks. But what this means is that we always have somebody on the streets representing VOI who are given very specific tasks around making sure that vehicles are not cluttering, moving vehicles to places where they're more likely to be used, they're more likely to be requested by riders, and just ensuring that the service is operating smoothly. So just a quick look at the scooter that we will be using for the on-street rental service. It's our Voyager 3X. I won't go through all of the details here because the slide is quite busy. But a couple of things that I will point out. Every scooter is fitted with front and rear lights and reflectors. Because this is an operated service, we're obviously able to audit the fleet very regularly, inspect it. We employ trained engineers, trained mechanics to do that, to ensure that the things like the lights are all working correctly, the brakes are functioning correctly, there are no other problems with the scooter, for instance. Every scooter is fitted with a tamper-proof bell, and I think you might get a demonstration of that in due course from Mayor Bowles. Certainly, I hope you will. We have swappable batteries in the scooters. So what that means...
Give me a second.
Yeah, go on. There we go.
There we are. Thank you. One of my colleagues has just done that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have swappable batteries. So what that means is when a scooter is low on charge, we don't need to return the whole vehicle to our warehouse to be charged, nor do we need to have charging infrastructure on the street. Instead, we charge the batteries in our warehouse. We can then send our e-cargo bikes out with fully charged batteries, and we can swap the batteries in situ. So while they're out in the operating zone. And what that means is that we can really maximize the availability of the fleet, so that we're not having to take vehicles out of service and make them unavailable for riders because the battery is low. So that swapping of the batteries is done by VOI trained employees. No rider or customer ever needs to do that charging. I think that's probably all the points. Oh, fine. The one more feature to just highlight is the double kickstand at the base of the scooter. This is used to park the scooter upright and to ensure that it's not left laying on the ground in a way that might be obstructing the pavement or causing a nuisance to other road users. So I'll just try to move on a little bit more quickly because I think I've probably gone over time now, but this just describes the process of signing up through the VOI app and renting a scooter. So as I mentioned, the customer will be required to scan their driving license before they can take their first ride. And then in order to take their first ride, they will scan the QR code, which is fixed to the scooter, and that will help VOI to know which particular scooter that person has hired. And then we can track the trip that person makes. At the end of the ride, the user will need to park within an allocated parking zone. So within Bristol and Bath, we're using what we call mandatory parking zones. These are designated within the map in the app, and users will be able to see where those parking zones are, and they must return the scooter to one of those zones before they can end the ride within the app. If a ride isn't ended, then it continues to accrue charges. So this is just a sort of flow. I won't dwell on this slide because this is actually from another market. It's very, very similar in the UK, but the best way to see this for yourself really would be to download the app and go through the steps, and then you'll see what that process looks like. You'll experience it yourself. Or in fact, so that was the last slide. I guess perhaps just a couple more things to touch on. One is health and safety. We have had a few questions, principally about COVID-19. We're disinfecting the fleet at least every 24 hours. So, and in many cases more frequently than that. So for instance, if somebody attends to the scooters, such as relocating a scooter from a low use area to a high use area, or perhaps swapping the battery, then we would also disinfect at the same time. We're also attaching copper tape to the handlebars of each scooter. Copper, as some of you will know, is a material that's very effective at inactivating coronaviruses. And for tier 3 areas, which I appreciate WECA isn't at the moment, some of our other operational cities are, we're putting additional messaging and advice in our app to our users, just with some advice about how to keep COVID safe. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. I know there are some Q&A later. I will hand back now to Richard.
Well, Lucy, thank you very much. And just before we move on, you've covered an awful lot of ground. But just to say to everybody, we had received a number of questions and a couple more have popped up. So, Lucy, I hope you'll be happy to field some of those shortly. And yes, I'm really keen now to bring Richard from Avon and Somerset Police in. it was vital from us right at the very start about how we worked in partnership and in collaboration. And clearly, Avon and Somerset Police are going to be a vital partner in how this trial both works, but is deemed to be a success. So Richard, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you around just how we've worked in partnership, but also from Constabulary's point around enforcement powers and so on. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon. As Mayor Tim says, my name's Rich McKiernon. I'm the manager of the Constabulary's Traffic Management Unit, which is part of the Road Safety Department based at headquarters. So what I'll briefly do is go over the police's involvement in helping set up the trial so far, and based on questions arising from previous similar presentations, try and answer some of the concerns that you may have. I don't think it's any great secret that when the government first announced that these trials were going ahead, I was, I think, concerned is the best word, both from a road safety and an enforcement perspective. However, having been engaged with the local authority since the trials were announced back in July, and with VOI since they were awarded the contract, I have been greatly reassured and relieved by the planning and implementation of this scheme. Both organisations have been highly receptive and sympathetic to all the police comments and recommendations we've made, and are committed to a fully open information sharing working relationship, which is critical from our perspective, and indeed to the success of the scheme itself. I've also been impressed by the commitment of both the safety of their riders and other road users, and ensuring that the scooters are used in accordance with the guidelines. And I know Lucy's presentation, there is more to it, and there are some very useful sort of safeguards built in there in relation to drink driving and other bits and pieces, which unfortunately we sort of slightly run out of time for. Enforcement-wise, in practice, the enforcement of the use of trial scooters is relatively straightforward. By definition in law, an e-scooter is a mechanically propelled vehicle, so if it's used in public, it's subject to the rules and all the restrictions of the Road Traffic Act, and therefore also all the offences contained therein. Remember, you're driving an e-scooter under the power granted you by your driving licence, so we can deal with any misuse or offences as we would any other driver, and that includes putting points on your licence. It's not a separate licence, so if you use an e-scooter inappropriately or commit offences on that, it's your same driving licence. So if you end up racking up 12 points on an e-scooter, you lose your full driving licence. I guess the main headache from a policing perspective is that, as well as all trial scooters, you're obviously aware there's a large number of privately owned scooters on the road as well. Now, the law in relation to those is very clear, as Mayor Wells said. Other than the trial ones, e-scooters are not lawful for use in public, only on privately owned land with permission. However, although the law is very clear, most people that we have stopped are totally unaware of this and are very surprised. They think they're doing the right things, all the best intentions. It's green, it reduces congestion, it reduces pollution, everything that's being encouraged. It's also very evident that when they bought the scooters, the fact they cannot be used on the road is not made clear to them. And this is an issue that we're starting to tackle with some of the shops that set up in Bristol, particularly selling e-scooters. There will be some work, especially in the run towards Christmas, to encourage people to not buy them as toys for their children, and then use them out on the, or let them out in the local parks and things. Because of this lack of general awareness, we have a media strategy which has been planned in consultation with the local authority and VOI. And so our force approach to dealing with these scooters has to be proportionate. And we are fully supportive of them, but it has to be lawful. So if you want to use one, fantastic, but use a rental one, not your own. So our approach is very much in line with our approach to COVID, where sort of the rules are slightly confusing at times. We will generally engage, explain and educate in the first instance, with your details being recorded that you've been warned, with enforcement taking place if you're caught again. And enforcement in relation to privately owned scooters is that your scooter will be seized and destroyed. It will not be returned. The trial scooters obviously come with their own insurance, so that's not so much of an issue, and we won't be seizing those. But the users do need to be responsible. We have regular planned meetings with the council and VOI, which will run on throughout the length duration of the trial to discuss issues arising. And we'll be swapping details about the people who come into contact with either us or the council, the VOI, and the Bureau of Audit way. And if we need to take enforcement action, that will happen. However, and 2 points which perhaps from a reassurance point of view. One is I don't actually foresee the trial scooters causing us too much of a problem. Experience and speaking to police forces where the trials are already live, the problems still come from the privately owned ones. Again, having spoken to my counterpart in Teesside Police, where the trial, or the very first trial went live, he is a 30-year traffic man who is born and bred and lives and breathes traffic offences. Very hard-bitten, cynical, twisted, and generally sort of I expected when I asked him the question, how's the trial gone, that he would give me both barrels. And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, it's been a total non-event from a policing perspective. Now, you can go online, you can find all sorts of horror stories in the media, but they are limited. And of course, the bad news ones become the good news stories. But taking from the Teesside, and certainly the sort of the lessons learned from the trials that have been set up and from there, and certainly with my experience of VOI and the Combined Authority about the approach they're taking to this, I'm hoping that, fingers crossed, that again it will be for us a non-event from a policing perspective. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much, and thank you for but that's your engagement both personally but through the constabulary, and I know through the Chief Constable, but also through the Police and Crime Commissioner. They've all been very, very involved as well. So I'm grateful to you for that, and it was vital, that relationship. I'm going to ask Jason, who's been heading up our project here within WECA, to talk to us. Jason, I'm conscious of time, so I know you've got some interesting details there. So you're going to talk to us a little bit about some more technical information, a bit more detail around locations. And then at the end, we've got several questions that I know we'd all be keen to answer. So Jason, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mayor Bowles, and I think the benefit of going last is a number of the elements have already been picked up throughout the presentation. So hopefully this will be a bit of a summary and a bit of a reminder, and I'll also talk a little bit about the phasing of how we might expand as well. In terms of what we're trialing, as I say, I think this has been detailed quite a lot, but certainly those two different models with the hop-on, hop-off model and the leasing model were felt by ourselves to be a really good fit for the Combined Authority area, and certainly something that we thought fitted nicely with where we are with some of our transport challenges at present, but also some of the longer term aspects in terms of getting good sustainable use out of transport, and also some of those challenges that we've got with COVID as well. In terms of the phasing, we've talked about the rollout in central Bristol and central Bath, and the numbers that we're looking at probably in Bristol, as Lucy mentioned, and probably about 100 scooters to begin with, and that sort of darker area in sort of surrounding central Bristol is our first initial phase. The other two areas on the map show how we might expand out for future phases, phase 2 and then phase 3, and I'll come on to some of the timings for those shortly. But I think as we've all mentioned as panelists, actually seeing how the uptake of scooters goes, seeing what the demand looks like, making sure that we're progressing at a rate that we're comfortable with as a region, making sure that we're picking up and in regular contact with not just the operator and the police, but also our other unitary authorities as well, will very much determine the rate of expansion for those areas. Very similar in terms of that central area of Bath. Again, starting off at a size that we think is right in terms of developing that experience, is right in terms of actually some good provision on street, but also making sure that we're confident and don't overstretch the operational capacity, or also the public's propensity to take up this new mode as well. Again, if we expand into phases 2 and 3 for Central Bath, clearly linking with places like the University of Bath would be really key. Certainly seeing how the scooters cope with the hills, particularly in Bath and also elsewhere in Bristol, is going to be part of the learning and the trial as well. In terms of those timings, again, we've touched on this a little bit, but obviously we launch in those central areas on Thursday. Again, we would look to expand out probably as we winter as we lead into Christmas would be ideal, but certainly the expansion and the rate at which we scale up, as I say, is dependent upon a number of factors, but will certainly be something that we're communicating with the public as we go. Again, depending on how things progress, and also as we pick up how the trials are working nationally, how we roll out that leasing model, again, will be key. The whole of the region is shown there, and that would be the area within which the leasing model would operate. But again, making sure that we scale to that when we hopefully launch that in early 2021 would be the plan. And again, I've just shown on there the phase 3 for Bristol and Bath. If the timings fit and if it suits in terms of where we are with the region and where we are in terms of learning from those operational reviews, and then potentially that could be into spring of 2021. I think we've touched on this, as I say, quite a bit. A key element for us trialing e-scooters and why we were so keen to bring this potential solution to the region is to really understand that demand and understand what it can do for our future journeys, but also the journeys within the period that we're operating with some reduced public transport capacity. And obviously some of the challenges with COVID-19. So understanding how they operate within the current scenarios, but also understanding how they might operate long term is going to be really key to ensure that we hopefully understand the potential to roll this out as a future transport solution. However, that will be a decision not for us locally, but for the Department of Transport nationally. So continuing to work with them, continuing to learn where we are with our region and where other trial areas are nationally, and providing the evidence for the Department for Transport is going to be really key. And also making sure that we're picking up on that feedback from members of the public, users, and businesses across the region as well. I just wanted to touch on the reminder to keep pushing those points that have already been made by Mayor Bowles and Richard as well. That element of illegal use on the public highway for private scooters, I think, is a real challenge, and our scooters with Voi are very well identified. They're very well liveried, and certainly, as you've heard from Lucy, we've got some very good processes and technology in place to make sure that we can understand and also stay on top of and also help manage and control the use and behavior of the Voi scooters, and also our ability to learn from the trial and just things as we go along as well, because we do know that with it being a new mode of transport, Richard's touched on some of the elements of learning from some of the other areas. We do know that we need to keep flexible in terms of the approach that we'll be following. There's a number of remaining bullet points on there, which, as I say, I won't go into because have already been touched on, but I would just like to highlight the central government and DfT's guidance at the bottom of that slide as well. So I think that really would hopefully bring us on to questions. So I'll refer back to Mayor Bowles and again just flag the website address, which is our West of England Combined Authority website, and the e-scooter trial pages, which are very useful, and we'd certainly encourage people who are listening in tonight to have a look at and refer to. Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much indeed. And you're right in a sense, we've all touched on lots of aspects. So really keen now just to take some questions. There were a number of questions that were submitted to us before this evening's session started. So I'm going to take those first and address those. And then we'll look to start running through some of those that have been posed earlier. We're taking questions from local residents and local businesses here about this specific trial that's being undertaken. So, Lucy, I wonder if you would mind picking up an initial question that was submitted by Simon, where Simon says, based on trials in other cities who are using these scooters, is it a transfer from people driving, walking, and so on? And really, what are the benefits? Now, I think we've touched on it in lots of cases, and I appreciate it's very early days in our trials, but I'm mindful that you've been a very big operator across Europe, so it might be something you can sort of build on your experience as well there. Would you mind picking that one up, Lucy?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. I guess there are a few different points to make here. So within the UK, we're certainly collecting a lot of data about the trips being made, where those trips are starting, where those trips are finishing, what times of day they're being made, which days of the week, and so on. Every city that we're operating in, we share a city dashboard with the local authority there. So they're also able to have a look at that data and to understand the journey patterns and the types of behaviours that we're seeing from riders. We are also in the UK in the process of hopefully fairly soon closing one or perhaps even more than one research partnership with some university researchers, just to go a little bit deeper into this area and to understand a little bit more about our customer base and those issues of mode shift that were referenced. And you probably also know that the Department for Transport, as part of these trials, is requiring every operator who's conducting a trial anywhere in the UK very shortly to start collecting and sharing data about those trials with the department. The department has put out a monitoring and evaluation contract for an organisation. Whoever wins that will be responsible for evaluating that data from across the duration of the trials. What I can say is that, as Mayor Bowles suggested, we have obviously experience from some of the other cities we've been operating in for slightly longer. We have seen examples of when e-scooters have been introduced to a city that they have driven. They've increased use of public transport. Obviously, we have a slightly different situation in 2020 because of COVID and perhaps temporarily reduced capacity on public transport. So perhaps the trends that we might see in the first few months of our trials may not be completely representative of what we might expect to see when public transport capacity is increased again. But we have also seen that in those cities where we have what we would probably describe as a deeper integration with public transport, so perhaps perhaps that's an integrated ticketing or an integrated payment product that integrates with some of the public transport operators in those regions, that uptake of public transport is even further increased. So these are all things that we will look at in the UK, in each individual city, but also across our trials generally.
Thank you, Lucy. I was just making sure I wasn't on mute and doing that error that so many of us do in these spaces. Can I just pick up one of the other questions that came in? And in a sense, you've touched a little bit on it, but I'm going to sort of elaborate slightly. And that was, why was Bristol chosen as a host for the trials? You've heard from Jason around how we were very ambitious and very successful in a bid to become a future transport zone. In a sense, Lucy's touched on that, about her experiences in other parts of Europe. So this was always going to be one of our ambitions in that. What we know in our region is people are keen to use public transport. But one of the challenges we have is also around that connecting from where they live or work to those transport hubs. And I think Lucy touched on that. And I know from my experience talking to people, that's something that people see this is really important about. So this will do lots of things in helping people get more involved in active travel, hopefully help strengthen and drive forward our commitment to delivering new public transport options and giving people that whole part of being around this. So Department of Transport and Government have accelerated these trials and opened them up more because of COVID to others, but this was always something that was very much part of our ambition for the work that Jason's been leading on future transport zones. So let's go and open another one up if we may, and I would perhaps, if I could ask Jason, there was a question from Alex about what's being done to ensure elderly, blind and deaf groups can hear the scooters going by. Do they have bells? I hope and I've answered the last part of the question when we just pinged the bell here, one that's close to me. But perhaps could you just again, Jason, just reinforce to everybody the work we did with all of those various groups and how we opened the opportunity up to even more to engage with us.
That's right. Thank you, Mayor Bowles. It is a requirement from the DFT in terms of the type approval of the scooters that they do have bells on them. And certainly, as Lucy's mentioned, they're going to be regularly inspected and maintained. So, so I'd expect those bells to be kept in good working order. In terms of some of the challenges, we recognise that electric vehicles are very quiet, therefore electric scooters are quiet. We also recognise that cycles and e-bikes are very quiet as well. So there's an element in terms of our on-street infrastructure that we design in such a way that we're very careful when we introduce shared use spaces. So I think in terms of the e-scooters themselves with bells, the environment within which they operate, there is already some good, if you like, precautions taken there. But Mayor Bowles is right. We've also gone beyond that, and we've done some quite extensive engagement locally with visually impaired groups and also accessibility groups as well. They've been really helpful in raising some thoughts and challenges back to us, and we've also got an ongoing commitment that we'll continue to engage with them and learn from them in terms of some of the challenges. There's one element in terms of launching e-scooters, but what we also want to make sure that in those first few weeks, as the usage settles down, and also over the coming months, that we continue to engage with those groups and continue to get feedback. And if there's great, sensible changes that we can make, certainly we would expect ourselves as a region, but also we would ensure that the Voi as our operator would look favourably on any flexibility or adaptations that we would need to make.
Okay, Jason, thank you very much. The next one is Lucy or Eric. I appreciate you've both got really responsible roles in Voi. It's a good question. What happens if an e-scooter, in this instance, the question says end up in the river or elsewhere? Now, again, you'll have lots of experience elsewhere around that. So can we tell me how we manage that challenge, please?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think the first thing to say is we just absolutely condemn this sort of behaviour. So, you know, whether it's an e-scooter or a supermarket trolley or anything else, you know, people absolutely shouldn't be littering the waterways. And you know, we take a very, very dim view of it when that does happen. But as you know, you will have seen on my slides, all of our scooters are fitted with GPS, and therefore we are able to detect when they might be in a body of water. We have been talking to the Canal and River Trust, but also some of the other organisations. Canal and River Trust don't have jurisdiction over all of the waterways in the UK. We are operating in a number of cities, so we've had a lot of conversations with similar groups about partnerships and about retrieving any scooters that might be in bodies of water. We have agreements with them to recover those scooters as soon as possible. But I can't stress enough. It's you know, it's just it's, you know, not only is it kind of vandalism of a service which is there for the benefit of all citizens in these regions, and you know, this is something which is particularly critical at this point in time when there aren't perhaps as many public transport options available as there might normally be, but it's just incredibly irresponsible. If this does happen and we can get any evidence on who's been responsible, we would also seek to prosecute. So all I can say is it's just you know, it's totally reprehensible, and don't do it.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And your point there about almost that aspect about looking to prosecute people, I think is a really important one, which almost leads me nicely into a question to Richard. And Richard, this is fairly a long question, but if I may, so what's the difference between an electric 3- or 4-wheeled mobility scooter? And one of these mobility scooters, sorry, this is verbatim, do require a license, tax or insurance. And therefore, extending the question, compared legally with an e-scooter, what's the difference regarding the number of wheels that are involved? So could you tell us a little bit about that? I'm sure type approval and things of that nature are going to come in, but perhaps you could take that one, and if you don't mind, Richard.
Yeah, I saw that one and hated it when I said, one thing I've learned over the years is criminal law is very straightforward. Traffic law is horrible. The problem is criminal law is fairly static. I mean, assaults don't change. The fact houses are burgled doesn't change, or the definition of them. With technology advancing all the time, the introduction of e-scooters, the law is basically lagging behind. The latest Road Traffic Act was last written in 1988. So it doesn't recognise e-scooters, it doesn't recognise a number of issues. So at various points along the way, ministers have shoehorned it into whichever seems to be the most appropriate. Sometimes that's down to personal opinion. Now, mobility scooters are classified as invalid carriages, which makes them exempt from motor vehicles under the Road Traffic Act. E-scooters are mechanically propelled vehicles and therefore are subject to the Road Traffic Act. E-bikes, again, come under totally different legislation, or are classified totally differently. So it is purely just down to the fact that the law is dated and needs to be sort of updated throughout to include all the new ways at the moment. So there is no sort of straightforward answer in many ways. It's just a case of that was deemed to be the most appropriate classification at the time. And the fact that mobility scooters, part of it was with mobility scooters, it was felt that if you were drink driving a mobility scooter, whereas if you're drink driving in a car and you lose that, that seems appropriate. If you're drink driving a mobility scooter, it might be your only form of transport or only way of moving around. And therefore that was felt that was an additional penalisation. And I think that was some of the basis behind it. So there is no straightforward answer. It is just purely, it's been put into whatever classification was deemed appropriate at the time. And e-scooters come under that, whereas e-bikes don't.
Richard, thank you very much. And it's good of you to clarify that. Perhaps if I could address I'll wrap the next two questions together to either Lucy or Eric. And the questions are, what's the maximum load for the scooter and how much will they cost the user?
Sure, I can speak to that. The official load per the scooter we have for on-street rentals is 100 kilograms. And the price we have is £1 to unlock, and after that it's 20p per minute. Thank
you very much.
If I could just quickly add to that, Mayor Bowles, apologies for interrupting, but just worth saying that we do have also some pass options. There is a 24-hour pass and also a monthly pass. These are available at a significant discount for three groups of people. The first of those is emergency service workers, so that's evidenced through the blue light card. The second of those is people working in the NHS. And the third then is staff and students of higher education institutes. Actually, there's a fourth, just occurred to me, which is people on a low income. So that is evidenced through an HC2 certificate, which is the NHS certificate you can obtain for help with healthcare costs. So all of those groups can obtain a monthly pass at a discount.
Thank you very much. And again, the next question for Lucy or Eric, and I'm sure it will be part of your experiences elsewhere. And it's, how will long-term leased e-scooters be maintained, especially around brakes?
Sure, I can answer this one. So we do monthly checks on the scooters, provided free of charge for the customers, and we'll be doing these at our local warehouse in Bristol. So during these safety checks, we check on the tires, brakes, battery health, and we'll make any replacements needed free of charge. So we monitor how many miles the scooter has driven before we ask the customer to basically come in for an MOT, where we will collect the scooter if needed.
Thank you very much. There was another part to it, is there an MOT? But my guess, and please just answer if I'm in the right track, as there isn't with other bikes or e-bikes, I'm guessing there isn't such a facility with e-scooters. Would I be correct?
You would be correct, yes. But we'll be doing these monthly checks regardless.
But thank you, and that's really encouraging, and it's nice to know. Now, the next question is slightly, I don't doubt the person who's asking this, but they say a normal e-bike has 50 to 100 charge/discharge cycles per lithium cell. How many cycles have the e-scooter batteries got, and is there a lithium recycling policy? So probably not directly related to direct use of the trial, but if either of you are in a position to answer, please say.
I don't have the number of cycles to hand, I'm afraid, but I certainly can speak on the recycling point. We have a policy at Voy that no scooter is ever kind of discarded of, if you like. So all the parts on the scooter are recycled when the scooter is kind of at the end of its useful life, and that includes the battery as well. We've placed a lot of focus on sustainability. The current generation of our scooter has an average lifespan of around 5 years now, and that is taking account of the high use of the fleet. So that's recognizing the fact that it is in an outdoors environment for most of its life, and it will be used very heavily throughout the day, many rides on average per day. So this is something that we do think about a lot. We work very closely with the manufacturer of our scooters, and we've done a lot of work in this area in the past, and we'll continue to do so in the future.
Lucy, thank you very much. Now we have 2 minutes left, and I've got two quick questions left, and that covers everything. I'm going to ask Jason this one, and I'll come back to a nice open one to end for our friends from Voy. But Seb says this is fantastic news about the trial, but what about East Bristol? So Jason, as that work you've been doing around where these operations, how could you answer that one?
Well, we shared the proposed expansion areas previously. They are based on what we think might be demand and usage at present. But clearly, if there are areas or pockets of demand that we're not aware of yet, that actually come to light as part of the trial, then I don't see any reason why we wouldn't consider those as an expansion. Clearly, it would need to be safe. It would also need to be economically viable and operationally viable as well. So I think we would keep all options open. Clearly, that would just cover the hop-on, hop-off models. Obviously, outside of the hop-on, hop-off areas, and that leasing model and that availability is region-wide. So even if we weren't to expand into a particular area with the hop-on, hop-off models, it still wouldn't stop individuals, businesses, communities actually accessing the leasing model as well.
Jason, thank you very much. And a lovely final open question from Marianne. If I want to take part in the trial, what exactly do I do? Can you be very, very quick on that one, Lucy or Eric, please?
Yeah, I can speak to it quickly. So please download our app, which is available for Android or iOS. Create an account, sign up, locate a scooter on the street. When you scan the QR code, you'll be asked to upload your driving license. So make sure you have it with you. The check is done in real time. And once that's verified, you'll be able to start riding. So.
Wonderful. Well, Bob, thank you for your very kind little, well, under Q&A, but Bob, thank you for your comment. May I just thank everybody who's joined us as attendees here. We're really so pleased so many people have been so keen to engage. This is a really exciting opportunity for the region. And can I also just say that there will be more information about the trial and its operation, which will be published on the Combined Authority WECA's website. So please keep in touch with us through that. We're very, very keen to take other questions. We've always been keen to engage around these things. And I hope the testament that we've been able to get people like Richard, Eric and Lucy here, along with our team from Jason and everybody else. This has been very much a collaborative exercise, not just to bring this evening together, but to bring together what I think is going to be a really exciting opportunity for everybody across the west of England. So thank you again to everybody who joined this evening, to my colleagues who've made this happen. And on that note, please all take care. Thank you so much and look forward to lots of safe e-scooter trials taking place across the region. Thank you all and very, very good evening to you all. Cheerio.